This is the reading on the early slave trade. A slave is forced to work for someone else. Slaves are owned by their masters. Slavery did not begin in America. Slavery has been around for a very long time. The Bible tells of people captured during wars. They became slaves to their captors. Very early slaves became house servants to their masters. More women than men were taken as slaves. Many became chambermaids. Scientists have found signs of slavery as far back in history as 3000 BC. These were signs found in Mesopotamia. China had slaves in 206 BC. Early Greeks and Romans let their slaves do their work for them. Tribes in Africa used their captives as slaves. Slave trade was conducted up and down the Nile River. Then the camel was brought to northern Africa from Arabia. Slave traders began creating routes through the Sahara Desert. Slave traders would trade their human merchandise for perfumes, cloth, and spices. These products were hard to find in the western part of Africa. The west coast of Africa became known as the Slave Coast. Powerful African kings began to trade with Europeans. In the 1500s, Portugal, Spain, and England all wanted to be part of the slave trade. England's strong navy helped them take control of slave trading in the Atlantic area. Spain and Portugal began exploring the New World in the late 1400s. They tried to enslave the Indians they found in this new part of the world. The natives in this area were not immune to the diseases the Europeans had brought with them. Whole tribes died out. The Spanish and Portuguese needed strong bodies. They had discovered that the lands in the New World were good for growing sugar. Growing sugar cane is hard work. When the natives began dying out, the need for new workers became great. Slaves from the jungles of Africa were brought to the Caribbean islands to replace the Indians. As the Europeans moved farther inland, the need for slave labor increased. The Spanish and Portuguese started colonies in what is today Brazil and Central America. The English took control of the trade routes to the north. By the middle 1600s, the English began to set up a trade route that looked like a triangle. The triangular trade route became strong in the 1700s. Let's say you were a trader. You would buy slaves along the west coast of Africa. You would load them on your ship. You would set sail for islands in the Caribbean. This was called the Middle Passage. Many slaves died during this voyage. They were kept in cramped quarters below the deck of the ship. This trip could last from 25 to 60 days. Meals consisted of rice or corn or beans. They were fed twice a day. Each slave received 1 pint of water with each meal. The living areas were dirty. Human waste filled the area. Disease spread fast. When you reached your port, you would sell your cargo of slaves. You would take the money you earned from the sale and buy rum, sugar, and molasses. You would load these on your ship and head north. When you reached the eastern coast of the United American colonies, you might stop at Boston or New York. At this port, you would again sell your merchandise. You would take the money you made from the sale and purchase lumber, furniture, or guns. You would put this on your ship and set sail for London. When you reached London, you would sell the goods. If business was good, you made a profit on your sales. If you did a good job, you made a lot of money. Many merchants made this trip many times. They became pretty wealthy. The slaves you brought to the Caribbean islands were resold. Some were sold to the sugar plantation owners on the islands. Some were sold to merchants from the eastern colonies as house servants. From the late 1700s to the middle 1800s, many slaves were sent to the southern colonies to work on cotton plantations. It is estimated that when slavery was at its peak, 90,000 slaves a year were brought across the Atlantic. Slave traders used goods to buy slaves. In 1690, an English trader could buy a healthy slave for around 5.5 pounds of goods. That same slave could be resold in Virginia for 15 pounds of goods. By 1760, the cost to the trader would have been 14 pounds of goods. The trader would sell him or her in Virginia for about 45 pounds of goods. The life of a slave was never easy. The hardships they had to endure were in many cases inhuman. No, slavery didn't begin in America. Some experts say it didn't end there either. That remains to be seen. So now we've learned a little about the slave trade and the triangular trade. You're going to scroll to the bottom here and see that there are 8 questions that I need you to answer. You can fill these out in the online text box. You'd get there by hitting the Edit Submission button and then using the first option available, or you may print this off and scan it back into me by uploading the file. The choice is yours. If you need help with any of this, please don't hesitate to call me, Mrs. Devlin, anytime. Good luck!